Well, I'll try to leave time for questions, and I'll try to get right into it. Oklahoma City's story could literally take over an hour if we started at the very beginning, so I'll try to succinctly capsulize our journey. But Oklahoma City is a perfect example of the urban sprawl that a lot of Western 20th centuries foresaw. In fact, when you saw those worst examples of urban sprawl up there, that's not Oklahoma City just because we didn't get there. We weren't successful enough to have achieved that level of urban sprawl and unwalkability, if that's a word. My entrance kind of into the subject matter really happened soon after I was elected mayor. Oklahoma City showed up on the list of the most obese places in America, and I was embarrassed by that, realized that I was an example of that sort of unhealthy condition, lost weight myself, and started doing an examination of our own city as to why our culture seemed to have such a prevalency of obese people. And I realized, and way to communicate it, is we had designed the city around the car, and we were going to start designing the city around the people. And with that kind of big picture perspective passed on to our civil engineers, it allowed us to start looking at projects a whole different way. And what I found was that inside of our Public Works Department wasn't a lack of enlightenment, it was a lack of direction. They were building projects, basically streets and all projects, with the goal of seeing how fast they could get a car from point A to point B. And that's how they define success. And indeed, there's virtually no traffic congestion in Oklahoma City. They had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Our Public Works Department just couldn't pat itself on the back fast enough because they thought they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And in a sense, no one had said otherwise. But when we decided to look at it, that wasn't really what it was about. And this design where we had the most fast food restaurants per capita of any city in the country, and we had not built sidewalks, which seemed okay because there was nowhere to walk to anyway. You had this city that needed an injection of a new way of thinking. And so we immediately put into our bond issue, the next bond issue, a new round of policies that any time we go in and resurface a street or make a 2-lane street into a 4-lane street, we add a sidewalk. And if it's, no matter what the circumstances are, if it at all makes sense, if there's any place to walk to. And then we redesigned all of our inner city streets to be more pedestrian friendly. So just completely redid all the infrastructure in the inner city, highly landscaped cities with on-street parking, narrowed the streets in many cases. The streets had been laid out over 100 years ago when horses and buggies were providing the transportation. And it was just an entirely new way of Oklahoma City looking at the concepts of designing cities. Because if you had grown up in Oklahoma City and you really didn't know there were other ways of life, and you kind of felt like what we had done was successful. And it kind of took an examination of ourselves to realize that we had failed in many of our policies, and it had led to the unhealthy condition for human beings. And Oklahoma City had become a great place to live if you happened to be a car. But if you were a person, you were constantly fighting the automobile. And so, fortunately, we had an enthusiastic mayor 20 years ago, very pro-business, saw that we needed to create a stronger economy, created a project with a penny on the dollar sales tax that allowed us to invest in a lot of inner city infrastructure. And here we're talking about things like a downtown baseball stadium and a sports arena and a new library and some public transit, but some new investment in the inner city. We followed that up with a school sales tax proposal that allowed us to rebuild anew or refurbish every inner city school, all 75 buildings. So again, new investment in the neighborhoods that hadn't had new investment in a long, long time. And those new investments started kickstarting neighborhoods around the inner circle. The key to most of this, though, was that we had a stronger and growing economy that allowed the investors to see opportunities to invest and to build new mixed-use developments and to kind of help it go along. The policies wouldn't have been enough if there hadn't been a strong economy to come along. And Oklahoma City had seen an incredibly poor economy in the 1980s, and it was only coming out of that economy that we're able to make the necessary changes. In Oklahoma City today, we have, through that initiative and others, established a funding program to go back into urbanized areas and put sidewalks where they weren't before. We had built schools and we had built neighborhoods, but we hadn't built sidewalks to connect them. We had public buildings next to neighborhoods, but again, not sidewalks to connect them. And it's very expensive to go back into existing neighborhoods with all the curb cuts, the ADA requirements, and the existing utility lines that might be in the way. But we're going back in and building miles and miles of sidewalks in these fully urbanized areas, into these neighborhoods that, again, hadn't had a whole lot of new investment. We're building senior health and wellness centers throughout the community. We're building in a grand total of well over 100 miles of jogging and biking trails throughout the city. I mentioned the complete infrastructure downtown. And what I think, though, may be most magical long-term is a whole new way of looking at how we design our cities and realizing that even though we had created a life where we were very reliant on the automobile and succeeded in that direction, that's not the best use of our money and our time, and it's certainly not the best way to make sure that our kids and our grandkids choose Oklahoma City as a long-term place to live. The Census Bureau now reports that we're having incredible gains population-wise. It's highly educated 20-somethings moving from Texas and California. How many of you read The Grapes of Wrath when you were a kid? I'm always amazed at that. I thought it was something we did in Oklahoma to make sure we felt bad about ourselves. But in The Grapes of Wrath, what happened? Poor Oklahomans moved to California for a better future. When you look at the census statistics now, it's the wrath of grapes. Lots of high-paying jobs are moving from moving from California to Oklahoma. A lot of engineering jobs, a lot of aerospace jobs, and certainly there's energy jobs being created in an economy that is amongst the best in the country. Oklahoma City's turnaround could be chronicled in a lot of different disciplines, but I think key to it was, first of all, realizing that the inner city needed help. You can't be a suburb of nothing, although we tried really, really hard. Once we started injecting the inner city with some new infrastructure, first it was public events, then it was streets, and then the schools. Once we started doing that, the economy started to grow, jobs started being created, and people were choosing to live in the inner city. We still have suburban ring growth, but at least now the inner city has a chance to compete with all that. So if you have a chance to visit Oklahoma City, I'd love for you to come see what we've done. We're fairly new at being a good place to visit. We've always been a good place to live and raise a family, but we're fairly new to being a tourism destination. But we're very proud of what we've created, and would love to have each of you come in and kind of see the success story. We're not Oak Park, but we've come a long way, from where we were. And I'll pause. I've probably got 2 or 3 minutes for questions, I'm guessing.
Well, we have a lot of time for questions after.
Oh, good.
So
okay.
if you'd like to.
I'd be glad to give up the microphone to others.
Okay.